"That's my car, you insane woman!" Ethan Cross roared, his gray-blue eyes blazing as he stormed down the marble steps. The bright red convertible screamed forward. Naomi Carter, the ebony-skinned maid he had ignored for years, clutching his limp 6-year-old son Caleb against the seat. Alarms wailed, security guards shouted into radios, and the iron gates bent under the force of her escape. Ethan's fists shook with rage. "Start the Porsche now!" he barked, Joel Mercer snapping to his side. Within seconds, the black Porsche 911 tore out of the driveway, its tires shrieking. Inside, Ethan's voice cut through the roar of the engine. "She stole my son. She's finished." Meanwhile, Naomi's hands gripped the wheel, her eyes wide with terror and resolve. She whispered to the unconscious child, "Hold on, Caleb. I won't let you die." The city blurred into chaos as Billionaire and Maid collided in a desperate chase that would change everything. The morning in Denver carried that crisp October bite that made the mountains look closer than they were, their snowy peaks reflecting the sun like polished glass. In Cherry Hills Village, where houses looked more like fortresses than homes, the Cross estate sat on a rise of land, sprawling gray stone and mirrored windows watching over the tree-lined streets below. It was a fortress of wealth, guarded by gates taller than a man and a security system named Argus that spoke with the tone of a butler but enforced like a warden. Naomi Carter moved through the silence of that house as though it belonged to someone else, which of course it did. 27 years old, she had skin the deep brown of river earth and eyes a soft but guarded hazel. Her frame was slim and wiry, honed by years of cleaning, lifting, and moving without rest. She wore her hair pulled back into a bun that never stayed neat, loose curls springing free at her temples. Naomi wasn't the kind of woman to draw attention. She had learned long ago that invisibility was safer, but there was a steady strength in the way she carried herself, as though every step reminded her she still had work to do. Her goal was simple, heavy, and constant. Keep this job, keep the paycheck, keep her little brother Marcus in college. Marcus was 19. The first in their family to step foot on a university campus. Naomi had promised their late mother she would protect his future, no matter what. That promise drove her to work 16-hour days, cleaning rooms she could never afford to sleep in. Inside the greenhouse wing, sunlight scattered through fogged glass, warming the air and making it smell faintly of basil and wet stone. Naomi was folding fresh towels when she heard it, the quiet hum of a toy truck rolling across the tiles. Caleb Cross, 6 years old, had wandered in with his truck in hand. He was a slight boy with pale hair that curled when it grew too long and cheeks that carried faint freckles like dusted sugar. His gray-blue eyes were his father's, though softer, warmer. Caleb liked to hum when he played, tiny tunes only he seemed to recognize. Naomi watched him for a moment, smiling despite herself. Then the sound came, a cough, not ordinary but wet and heavy, rattling from deep inside. Caleb's truck clattered against the floor as he doubled over. Naomi dropped the towels and sprinted to him. His lips had taken on a bluish cast, his breaths shallow, uneven. His little chest fluttered without rhythm. "Caleb," she whispered, panic scraping her throat. She pressed the intercom on the wall. "Medical emergency," she ordered. "Child in respiratory distress. Open the front gate and call 911. Argus's calm male voice answered after a pause that felt like mockery. "Assistance requires homeowner authorization. Please wait while Mr. Cross is contacted." Naomi slammed the button again. "He can't breathe. Override." "Override requires biometric consent," the voice repeated. Her arms shook as she gathered Caleb against her. His hand clawed weakly at her sweater, eyes fluttering. The door burst open and Raymond Dugan, the security chief, filled the frame. Dugan was a broad man in his 40s, jaw square, a scar cutting through one eyebrow. Ex-police, his body had settled into the sturdy build of a man who had traded speed for authority. "What happened?" he barked, already reaching for the radio at his vest. "He's crashing," Naomi snapped. "Open the gate and call EMS." "Protocol," Dugan began, but Naomi cut him off. "Protocol will kill him," she shouted. "He needs a hospital." But Dugan only grimaced. muttering into his radio. "We need Mr. Cross's clearance. Hold the gate." Naomi's heart slammed in her chest. She thought of Marcus, of the call she had missed the night before. "I might get dropped from classes if I don't pay by Friday, sis." She thought of her mother's death years ago when an ambulance stuck in traffic had cost them everything. She was not going to watch another child die because adults argued about rules. Without a word, she spun and ran, Caleb tight against her chest. She crossed the marble halls, the polished staircases, until the house opened into the garage. The garage gleamed like a showroom, polished concrete shining beneath spotlights. Luxury cars lined the space. A Porsche 911 crouched like a predator, a Mercedes G-Wagon gleaming in matte black. But her eyes locked on the Cadillac Escalade, black and towering, the SUV that Ethan Cross used when he wanted to announce his power without saying a word. Naomi set Caleb gently on the leather bench by the door, then found the key fobs lined neatly on the wall. The Cadillac's fob was cold, heavy in her palm. "Ms. Carter," Argus said overhead, "step away from the vehicle." "Override," she said, teeth gritted. "Code red. Override requires biometric consent." "Then sue me," she hissed, scooping Caleb back into her arms and fastening him into the rear seat. She pressed the inhaler to his lips, praying he could draw in the medicine. His chest rattled again. The Escalade roared to life when she hit the ignition, dashboard lighting up like a cockpit. Dugan appeared in the doorway, breathless. Allison Pike, a younger guard with cropped hair and sharp eyes, stood behind him. "Naomi, don't do this," Dugan said. Naomi's eyes locked on his, fierce. "If Mr. Cross wants me fired, he can do it at the ER." For a beat, no one moved. Then Allison's radio crackled. She raised it to her lips and muttered, "Hold your fire." "Let her go." Naomi drove forward, the Escalade rolling heavy and unstoppable. The wrought iron gates loomed ahead, closed and unmoving. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She pressed the accelerator harder. At the last moment, the gates stuttered open. Argus relenting, or maybe someone in security unwilling to test what would happen when steel met Cadillac. But they opened only halfway. The Escalade tore through, metal screaming as it bent, one gate tearing from its hinge. Naomi didn't slow down. The SUV burst onto the road, autumn leaves swirling in its wake. Caleb's breaths were ragged in the back seat, but his small hand twitched when she reached behind to touch him. "Stay with me, baby," Naomi whispered. "I've got you." Behind her, alarms blared across the estate. At that very moment, Ethan Cross, tall, broad-shouldered, his chestnut hair still mussed from sleep, was storming down his staircase barefoot, eyes locked on the alert flashing across his phone. Unauthorized vehicle, Escalade, driver, Carter, N, passenger, Cross, C. He didn't hesitate. Moments later, a silver Porsche exploded out of his garage, its engine snarling, tires spitting gravel. Ethan's jaw was clenched, fury written in the set of his shoulders. To him, it looked like his maid had stolen a $120,000 SUV and kidnapped his son. Naomi didn't look back. The hospital was 10 minutes away, maybe less if she drove like she had nothing left to lose. She tightened her grip on the wheel, heart hammering. She thought only of the boy gasping in the back seat and the promise she had made to herself long ago. Never let another child die waiting for permission. The Escalade 8 miles like it had an appointment with mercy. Naomi kept both hands glued to the wheel, the vehicle's bulk and honest comfort under her palms as she negotiated a city that was waking up grudgingly. Commuters tuning radios, coffee cups steaming, school buses yawning into their roots. She kept her speed reasonable in the parts that mattered, and reckless when a red light or polite driver stood between her and a child gasping in the back seat. The sun climbed higher, throwing the front range in hard silhouette, the autumn air rhyming the edges of everything with sharpness. Caleb's breathing was a small, ragged metronome at her shoulder. Every shallow inhale felt like a countdown. Naomi watched him in the rear view even as her eyes flicked to the road, thinking in two channels at once where to turn, when to pull over if she had to, and how to keep the boy's airway open long enough for a doctor to do something long and complicated to it and make it right. The phone vibrated against the cup holder as if it too had a pulse. Marcus flashed across the screen in all caps. Naomi's throat tightened. Marcus Carter, 19, her brother, was a long-legged kid with a stubborn jaw and a college scholarship he couldn't afford to lose. He had the sort of face that looked like someone who could survive too much and still smile. He had been the first in the family to get out of the neighborhood and into state school. Naomi had mortgaged hours and dignity so he could have that chance. She hit speaker with a thumb that was steady, even if the rest of her wasn't. "Marcus?" She forced her voice into a shape that could sound ordinary over the drone of the engine. "Naomi," he gasped, immediate and thin. "They just put a hold on my account. They're dropping me from class if I—" A sob hit the line like a hand. Naomi tightened her jaw and pressed the accelerator just enough to remind a merging SUV that this road had an agenda that morning. "Listen," she said, "you're not getting dropped. I'll call financial aid when I can breathe. You call me after you get to your professor. Don't skip class. Please." Marcus's voice broke. She heard him swallow. "Sis, what's going on? Are you okay?" Guilt, knife sharp, cut under her ribs. She swallowed a lie that would save him panic. "I'm okay. I'll—" and then leaned the phone into its cradle to focus on the lane. "I'm almost there, Marcus. I promise." The call cut like a ribbon. Naomi drove like she had a promise to keep. From behind them, a silver slash of Porsche answered the morning like a gunshot. Ethan Cross's car was a different animal, lower, meaner, more suited to a man who'd learned control could be exercised through acceleration. He was not a man who liked being surprised. He framed the Escalade in his windshield like a problem to be solved and pressed the Porsche's nose into the tail of traffic. Riding shotgun in Ethan's car was Joel Mercer, his head of security. Joel had been a former Army sergeant, 36, with the kind of face that didn't crack smiles and a skin-tight buzz cut that made his skull look aerodynamic. A tattoo of interlocked anchors peeked from under his shirt collar, the sort of memento men in service kept to remember the one thing they could trust: brotherhood. Joel's hands lay flat on his knees. His gaze was a machine set to observe. He watched Naomi's taillights in his instruments like a man studying a chess opponent's pattern. "He's pulling away," Joel told Ethan, voice flat as gravel. Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel until his fingers blanched. "Don't let her lose him." Lights blinked in the rearview blue and red from a patrol unit on the shoulder, officers interpreting a chase. Officer Luis Ramirez, the man behind that cruiser, had been on the highway 10 years, 50, compact, with a mustache that suggested a lifetime's worth of stern schoolteacher patience. He loved his job because it had rules. He hated mornings like this because rules bent into moral questions when children were involved. He radioed in a description, voice even as he toggled the siren to silent observe. The highway had folded into a construction bottleneck up ahead near I-25, two lanes squeezed into one because crews were repaving the shoulder. Naomi realized the bottleneck with a cold breath too late. Traffic stacked like a deck of cards. Brake lights flared. She could see a semi-truck halfway through the constriction, hauling a flatbed with pallets strapped, and a driver who did not have the leisure of patience. The truck driver was a man large enough to make his name echo in a bar. Hank Hollis, 50s, hands like mitts and a face weathered by sun and diesel. He wore a worn ball cap and a t-shirt that read "Long hauls, small talk," and the look of a man who'd learned to focus on the road and let other people's drama pass. Naomi watched the truck and the red sea of brake lights compress beneath her. The Escalade's weight pushed against momentum. The difference in mass made stopping a slower art than she could afford. She took the left lane, weaving between cars with the practiced courage of someone who'd learned to thread a life through narrower places. A sedan tried to change lanes without signaling classic, thoughtless. Naomi flicked her blinkers and cut the wheel. Tires hissed. The semi's trailer loomed like a dwarf mountain. For a heartbeat, Naomi thought of the gouge it would make if it struck them. She counted in her head, slowly like a metronome. 3 heartbeats, 2, 1. At the last sliver of space, she jammed the Escalade between a minivan and a delivery truck. A horn bellowed Hank's rig, furious as a bull. The truck clipped the Escalade's rear fender with a metallic lament that translated immediately into a terrible, high wail. Naomi's stomach dropped, as if the universe had dropped something inside it. The Escalade fishtailed, then grabbed the road with that blessed shop floor grip of new tires and engineering. She felt the SUV breathe beneath her like a living thing and answered with a cold, practiced focus. Caleb's hand found hers over the center console. It was a whisper of warmth, a little weight that steadied her. "I'm here," she told him. The delivery driver in the adjacent lane, a wiry woman with a bun and a face that had folded into too many nights of overtime, screamed curses and swerved. The highway's chorus hit a new pitch. Horns, brakes, an officer's PA in the distance. Ethan's Porsche carved through the chaos like a scalpel. He was close now, a shadow in her rear view, the Porsche's grille jagged and aggressive. Joel's voice was a calm undertow over the comms. "Ethan, allow me to make contact." Ethan did not reply. He had trained himself to do the decisive thing and suffer the consequences quietly, if that was required. He tapped his palm on the horn in a clean, clipped sequence, then nudged his car toward Naomi's left flank in a maneuver that read, in traffic code, like intent to box her in. Naomi saw the movement and felt the old animal reflex, a caution knitted into her by years of being small around men with louder wallets. But she had a smaller, more urgent animal in the back seat, a child who might not last a red light. She saw the ramp for Mercy General flash by through a gap in traffic, a small green Mercy written in neon. Her throat closed. She made a choice that was not really a choice. A calculation of what might kill her faster, staying in the lane and letting the boy die, or pushing forward and risking every ticket, every headline, every consequence that belonged to other people. She edged the Escalade into a sliver of shoulder that maintenance workers had left for emergency access and lunged for the off-ramp. Ethan's Porsche mirrored, tentative. Joel's hand rose, not to hit the steering wheel, but to block if Ethan tried something reckless. Ethan's face was a map of disbelief and fury privilege meeting disobedience in the most personal way possible. He slid the Porsche up against the Escalade's left rear, something between boarding and boxing, and cut her path. Traffic slowed to an operatic crawl as commuters craned to see the audacity on the freeway, a forbidden tableau of a billionaire's coupe and a housekeeper's SUV in mortal negotiation. Naomi's heart hammered like something trying to get out of her ribs. She could smell brakes and coffee and the faint metallic tang of panic in the cab. Caleb's breaths were less frequent now. They came with great effort and then silence. Naomi's hands shook, but she didn't let go of the wheel. Ethan climbed from the Porsche before she had entirely stopped. He looked ridiculous in his anger. Fast casual clothes, a throw of stubble, a man who wanted an explanation and neither asked politely nor paused to imagine one. He moved with the purposeful calm of a man used to commanding rooms. Joel, enormous and unbothered by pavement, stayed a step behind, alert like a dog that knows to wait for its master's signal. A small crowd gathered at the edge of the shoulder-jeering horns, a woman on a cell phone filming, the human appetite for spectacle roused. Hank the truck driver leaned on his horn with theatrical aggravation, and Officer Ramirez pulled his cruiser between lanes to create a buffer, lights stroking the highway like heartbeat tracings. The air smelled like burnt rubber and adrenaline. Ethan reached for Naomi's door handle, but Joel stopped him with a single hand on his forearm as if the man could be guided like a hot iron. "Stand down," Joel said in a voice that was a velvet rope. It kept the crowd polite. Ethan glared at Naomi, his mouth shaping accusations he didn't know how to finish. "You stole my car." His words were jagged with more than danger. There was a corporate hum to them, as if he were reading the script of an insult into someone else's life. Naomi's throat felt dry as dust. She didn't look up. She kept her eyes on Caleb's face in the mirror pale, a shark of breath breaking, then leaned forward and opened the window. Traffic idled like a field holding its breath. She spoke loud enough for the crowd to hear, for Ethan to hear, for anyone with ears. "He's dying," she said, and let the words carry like a bell. "If I stop, he will die." The world narrowed to the small body in the back, and that truth, blunt and absolute. Ethan's jaw worked. The Porsche's engine hummed like a contained animal. For a moment, the billionaire's armor looked less like control and more like a man unmoored. He hesitated. Memories are private things that sometimes turn public. A father who had missed a birthday because a meeting ran late. A child who had coughed and been soothed by explanation but not presence. Something softened in Ethan's eyes. Something that had nothing to do with PR or power and everything to do with a human malfunction called fear. Joel's hand eased from his forearm but remained ready. Hank honked impatiently as if to ask whether the universe would decide before his delivery got delayed. Naomi's knuckles paled on the wheel. Her voice did not tremble anymore. She had reached a place inside her where consequence was small next to the weight of a single breath. The highway smelled like wet leaves and something like truth. Ethan inhaled, then looked at Joel as though searching for a legal precedent written into muscle. Joel met his gaze and said softly, "Do the right thing." The line between public spectacle and private crisis thinned to an incandescent wire. Naomi watched Ethan, the granite face of a man used to being obeyed, hold a decision in his palm like a coin. He had to choose whether to be the kind of man who punished perceived theft or the kind of man who recognized that his son's life was worth more than a dent in his driveway. He closed his eyes for a second. The traffic waited. Caleb's chest rose, a feather barely lifting. Naomi felt as if time itself had leaned forward, waiting for the answer. Mercy General stood like a fortress of glass and steel on the edge of downtown Denver, its curved facade catching the late morning light as if it had been polished for this very moment. The ER entrance was a chaos of motion ambulances reversing with sirens cut, nurses in blue scrubs darting out with clipboards, security guards managing families who had already begun to fracture under the weight of waiting. The scent of disinfectant floated in the crisp autumn air, mixing with exhaust fumes and the acrid bite of burned rubber from Naomi's desperate arrival. Naomi pushed through the sliding doors with Caleb cradled in her arms, his head lolling against her shoulder, lips bluish, eyelids twitching in weak spasms. A nurse hurried forward to meet her, a woman in her late 20s with a round, kind face and a heavy blonde braid tucked into her collar. Her name tag read Kelsey Moran. Kelsey had grown up in rural Nebraska, daughter of a farmer who taught her that small hands can still lift heavy things when they must. She had carried that lesson into nursing, where her calm manner often disarmed panic before medicine did. "Respiratory failure?" Kelsey's voice was brisk. Naomi nodded, fighting to steady her own breathing. "Asthma. He's not pulling air," Kelsey signaled behind her. A second nurse, lean, pale-skinned, glasses perched low, his dark hair damp with sweat from a double shift, appeared with a gurney. His name was Victor Hall, 33, meticulous by nature, a man whose colleagues teased him for retying his shoelaces twice before every shift. Naomi laid Caleb down, whispering, "Stay with me, champ," as the gurney's wheels squeaked and spun toward the trauma bay. The sliding doors sighed shut, cutting her off. The silence that followed punched her in the chest harder than any noise. She stumbled against the wall, her cardigan damp where Caleb's small body had pressed against it. Then the Porsche screamed into the loading zone. Ethan Cross erupted from the car, fury coiled into every stride, his chestnut hair disheveled, sweat glistening at his temples. Joel Mercer followed a pace behind, calm as ever, scanning the crowd for threats. The onlookers, visitors, patients, a homeless man with a shopping cart rattling with cans paused in their own grief long enough to notice the spectacle of wealth colliding with desperation. Ethan reached Naomi in 2 long strides. His face, usually sculpted for magazine covers, was red and distorted, his jaw trembling with rage. Without warning, his hand struck across her shoulder, the blow resounding in the sterile air. Naomi staggered back, one hand clutching the spot, stunned more by the violence than the pain. His voice cracked through the atrium like breaking glass. "You reckless thief! You stole my car! You endangered my son! You—" Joel's hand caught Ethan's arm before the second strike could land. The security man's eyes, dark and flat as river stones, held him back with more strength than words. Gasps echoed from the people in the waiting area. A mother clutching a toddler pulled him closer. An old man in a wheelchair muttered something under his breath. Naomi's eyes watered, but she did not retreat. Her voice shook but did not break. "I begged for help. I begged your system to open the gate." He couldn't breathe. He would have died. Before Ethan could snarl another accusation, a new voice cut across the atrium, calm and commanding. "Mr. Cross." Heads turned. Walking through the sliding doors from the trauma bay was Dr. Lorraine Green. She was in her early 50s, medium height, her frame sturdy rather than slim, her posture radiating unshakable certainty. Her skin was a deep, warm brown, her hair streaked silver and pulled back into a neat bun. Her eyes, a piercing mahogany, carried the weight of decades spent watching children cling to life by fragile threads. She wore green scrubs under a white coat embroidered with her title, Chief of Pediatric Medicine. There was something about her presence that hushed the atrium more effectively than security guards ever could. Dr. Green had grown up on Denver's north side, the daughter of a postal worker and a school secretary. As a child, she had lost her younger brother to an asthma attack in a neighborhood without quick ambulance access. That grief had never left her. It had carved her into a woman who carried urgency in her very bones. She folded her arms and looked squarely at Ethan. Her voice was steady but flint-edged. "Your son is alive." "Barely. If he had arrived 3 minutes later, we would be preparing a body bag." The words landed like stones. Ethan froze, his fury arrested mid-breath. Dr. Green's gaze didn't waver. She pointed toward Naomi. "This woman is the reason your child is still breathing. Not your gates, not your money, her. She saw what needed to be done and did it." Naomi stood trembling, one hand wrapped around her middle. She looked small in the expanse of marble and glass, but in Dr. Green's words she suddenly felt anchored, as if someone else finally recognized the weight she had been carrying alone. A murmur rippled through the atrium. The homeless man with the shopping cart whispered hoarsely, "Takes guts to steal a billionaire's wheels for a kid." The mother with the toddler nodded, eyes softening toward Naomi. Joel released Ethan's arm slowly, his expression unreadable but his stance relaxed, as if silently agreeing with the doctor's assessment. Ethan's mouth opened but no words came. The steel mask of control cracked, revealing something raw beneath. Confusion, shame, maybe even fear. Dr. Green stepped closer, her voice lower but no less sharp. "You are his father. But today, you were not the one who acted like it." She was Naomi's eyes brimmed with tears that she blinked back quickly. She would not cry here, not now. Ethan stared at her, the edges of his anger unraveling into silence. For the first time in years, in front of strangers and his own bodyguard, he looked like a man without an answer. The pediatric wing of Mercy General was quieter than the emergency bay. Fluorescent lights hummed softly above the rows of recovery rooms, their walls painted with murals of forests and balloon animals in a desperate attempt to distract children from the beeping machines. Naomi sat slumped in a vinyl chair outside Caleb's room, the cardigan around her shoulders like a shield against the air conditioning. Through the window she could see the boy asleep, oxygen tubing looped under his small nose, chest rising with slow but steady rhythm. She had refused food, refused coffee. Her only movement had been to wrap her arms around herself and keep vigil. Joel Mercer leaned against the wall nearby, arms folded, silent as stone. His eyes were alert but not unkind. He had watched Ethan pace the hallway earlier, muttering into his phone to lawyers and assistants. Now Ethan had stepped outside, and the silence had expanded like a fog. Joel broke it with a voice low and steady. "You did good. You..." Naomi turned, surprised at the words coming from the stoic bodyguard. Joel shrugged. "Seen enough emergencies to know what counts. You acted when others froze." Naomi nodded, but her eyes were far away. "It's not the first time I've waited on a gate," she whispered. Joel frowned, tilting his head, but she wasn't speaking to him anymore. Her voice took on the cadence of memory, quiet but sharp. When I was 19, I rode in the back of an ambulance with my mama. She'd collapsed at the kitchen table, heart attack. We had sirens screaming, lights blazing, but the street outside was under construction. A crane, barriers, traffic backed up for blocks. We sat there trapped while she gasped and gripped my hand. The paramedics tried, God knows they tried, but the seconds were sand slipping away. Naomi swallowed hard. Her eyes glistened, but she kept speaking. She died with me still begging for someone to move the barricade. Nobody did. I swore if I was ever put in that position again, I wouldn't wait for permission. Joel said nothing, but the muscle in his jaw tightened. From down the hall, Ethan reappeared. He had changed into a charcoal blazer over his t-shirt, his attempt at reclaiming control. His eyes lingered on Naomi, then on Joel before he approached. He spoke to Naomi without his usual arrogance. "The doctors say he'll make it through the night." Naomi nodded, her gaze never leaving Caleb's small frame. Ethan hesitated, then added quietly, "Dr. Green told me what you said. About your mother." I didn't know Naomi's eyes flicked to him. "Why would you? You never asked." Her tone was flat, not cruel but edged with truth. Ethan accepted the cut without flinching, only nodding once. But inside, her words gnawed at him. Later that evening, Ethan called his driver to bring him back to the estate. Yet, instead of retreating to his office as he usually did, he instructed Joel to discreetly pull Naomi's employment files. Within hours, he knew she was working a second job at a downtown diner on Colfax Avenue, overnight shifts 3 times a week. She earned tips and minimum wage, and every check went straight into tuition payments for her brother Marcus. Ethan had Joel drive him to the diner just past midnight. The place was called Ruby's 24-Hour Grill, its neon sign flickering against the cool night sky. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and grease, the booths worn by decades of insomniacs and long-haul drivers. Naomi wore a burgundy uniform with a frayed collar, her curls tied back under a cap. She moved between tables with the tired efficiency of someone who had no energy left for pleasantries, yet still refilled every cup without being asked. Ethan watched from a corner booth, unrecognized beneath a ball cap. The manager, a stout woman named Clara Hensley, barked orders from behind the counter. Clara was in her late 40s, heavy-set, with bright auburn hair always pinned up and a voice that could cut through clattering dishes. She had once dreamed of owning a bakery, but had ended up running diners instead, hardened by years of disappointment. She was brusque with her staff, yet protective when regulars gave them trouble. Ethan observed as a drunk customer snapped his fingers at Naomi. She merely smiled tightly, refilled his cup, and moved on. Clara caught Ethan watching and shot him a glare until he dropped his eyes to the menu. By the time Naomi finished her shift near dawn, Ethan had left, but the sight of her exhaustion lingered with him. For the first time, he began to consider that her life outside his mansion was heavier than he had ever imagined. Meanwhile, miles away in Fort Collins, Marcus Carter was unraveling. In his dorm room, textbooks sat unopened. His roommate, Darren Pike, lounged on his bed, lanky with shaggy blonde hair and a grin that came too easily. Darren had grown up middle class, a scholarship athlete who treated rules like suggestions. He had befriended Marcus quickly, sensing his vulnerability. Tonight, Darren dangled a packet of fake IDs with casual pride. "We've got a hookup at the bar downtown. You coming?" Marcus shook his head. His frame was thin, his brown skin clear but drawn from sleepless nights. He had Naomi's eyes, soft hazel but without her armor. "I can't, Darren. I just got a warning about tuition. I don't even know if I can stay." Darren shrugged. "Then all the more reason to party while you can." He tossed Marcus a can of cheap beer. "Or, if you're serious, I've got a buddy offering cash jobs. Off the books. No taxes, no questions. Construction sites, sometimes security gigs. Pays more than this place will ever give you." Marcus stared at the beer, guilt and temptation warring in his chest. He thought of Naomi's voice that morning, promising she would handle it. But promises couldn't pay bills. He cracked the can open. Back at the estate, Naomi returned after her diner shift to find Caleb recovering in a guest suite converted into a child's room. The boy smiled weakly when she entered, whispering, "You came back." She brushed his hair off his forehead. "Of course I did." Ethan watched from the doorway. He had not yet told her he'd been to Ruby's. Instead, he asked Joel later, "What do we know about her brother?" Joel's brows furrowed. "Bright kid, but I heard whispers. He's been skipping classes. Fell in with a crowd that's not clean." Ethan said nothing, but the seed of concern rooted itself. The next day, Naomi's phone buzzed while she was folding Caleb's clean clothes. The call was from Marcus. His voice was hoarse, panicked. "Naomi, I messed up. The cops were here. They caught Darren shoplifting. I wasn't stealing, I swear, but I was with him. They're talking suspension. I don't know what to do." Naomi's knees weakened. She glanced at Caleb asleep on the bed, his small chest finally steady. Her heart split between two directions: stay and guard the fragile boy who had begun to trust her, or run to rescue her brother from the spiral she had promised to keep him out of. The weight of both lives pressed against her ribs until she could barely breathe. She sat on the edge of the bed, phone clutched tight, whispering, "I can't lose either of you." Her eyes burned with a fear deeper than exhaustion, a fear of failing both promises at once. The summons came on a gray morning, the kind where Denver skies seemed to flatten against the earth and even the foothills lost their sharpness. Ethan Cross stood in his study at the estate, an envelope in hand, his jaw set hard. The embossed seal of the Denver County Court glared back at him. He read it twice, then let it fall onto the polished oak desk. Celeste Moore was back. Celeste had not been seen in nearly 4 years. She had left when Caleb was barely 2, her absence explained only by a terse note about not being made for motherhood. Now she returned like a storm no one had forecast, filing for custody, demanding the son she had abandoned. Celeste was 36, with caramel skin that had once turned heads in boardrooms and at charity galas. Her dark hair was styled sleek, her wardrobe designer chic but sharp as armor. Her face bore few lines, but her eyes told the truth, restless, hungry, calculating. She carried herself like someone who expected doors to open, and when they didn't, she would kick them in. She had grown up bouncing between wealthy relatives, always the guest but never the heir. That wound had hardened into a hunger for status, and in Caleb, she saw not a child but leverage. She arrived at the courthouse, flanked by 2 lawyers in tailored suits. The press swarmed like flies, cameras flashing as she raised her chin and spoke rehearsed lines. "I'm here for my son." It's time to correct the mistakes of the past. Naomi sat at the defense table beside Ethan, her hands trembling under the wood. She wore a navy blouse and simple slacks, clothes she had borrowed from a friend at Ruby's diner to look presentable. Her curls were tied back, but exhaustion still shadowed her face. She knew the stares, reporters labeling her the Maid, Celeste's attorneys whispering opportunist. Judge Miriam Caldwell presided. She was in her early 60s, tall and spare, with cropped silver hair and glasses that perched low on her nose. A lifelong Denver native, she had risen from public defender to family court judge. Her reputation was for patience with children and impatience with manipulation. Her robe could not conceal her wiry build, the product of morning hikes in the foothills, a discipline she credited with surviving both cancer and a difficult divorce. She looked over the case file with calm, assessing eyes. "Ms. Moore," Judge Caldwell began, "you may speak first." Celeste rose smoothly, her voice velvet but honed with steel. She painted herself as a mother seeking redemption, claiming years of healing and reflection. She gestured toward Naomi with a dramatic sweep. "And while I was finding my strength, this employee insinuated herself into my son's life. She stole not only my place, but also endangered him, recklessly driving a car she had no right to, almost killing him in the process." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Naomi's stomach clenched. She thought of Caleb's pale lips, his desperate gasps, and knew the truth was being twisted until it strangled her. At that very moment, miles away in Fort Collins, Marcus Carter sat in a holding cell. The night before, he had been caught in a brawl outside a bar, his so-called friend Darren pulling him into a fight he hadn't wanted. Marcus was bruised, his lips split, his hazel eyes wide with regret. Officer Janet O'Leary, the desk sergeant, processed his paperwork. She was a broad woman in her 40s with short-cropped blonde hair, freckles scattered across her nose, and a no-nonsense attitude. She had grown up with brothers who fought on every street corner, and she could spot a kid who had made a bad choice versus one headed down a darker path. She looked at Marcus and sighed. "You don't strike me as a criminal, kid, but you're running with the wrong company." Marcus dropped his head into his hands. All he could think of was Naomi, already carrying too much. Back in Denver, Celeste's lawyers paraded witnesses. A former nanny testified that Celeste had once sung to Caleb as a baby, her voice shaking as though coached. A private investigator presented photographs of Naomi at Ruby's diner, implying she was too poor, too distracted to care for a child. The words gold digger and unfit floated unspoken but heavy in the air. Ethan clenched his fists under the table. His instincts screamed to keep silent, to let his high-priced attorneys handle it. But when Celeste smirked and declared, "My son deserves more than the care of a housemaid pretending at motherhood," Ethan stood abruptly. The courtroom hushed. "She is not a maid," Ethan said, his voice ringing across the chamber. "She is the reason my son is alive. When I was locked behind my own walls, when my gates and my rules would have let him die, she acted. She didn't think about cars or property. She thought about breathing, my son's breathing. She is the reason I still have a child to fight for." Celeste's mask faltered, her lips tightening. The gallery of spectators leaned forward, scribbling notes, phones poised. The judge turned to Naomi. "Ms. Carter, would you like to testify?" Naomi's legs felt like stone as she rose. Her hands gripped the railing as she faced the courtroom. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she spoke. "I didn't steal anything that day. I carried a child who couldn't breathe. I drove because I remembered what it felt like to lose someone while waiting on permission. I lost my mother that way. I swore I would never let it happen again." Her eyes swept the courtroom, finding Celeste's cold gaze, Ethan's conflicted one, the curious stares of strangers. "I don't need a title. I don't need recognition. I don't want another child to die because adults were too busy guarding their property or their pride. That's all I did. That's all I'll keep doing if I'm allowed." The words hung heavy in the still air. Even the scratch of pens stopped. Judge Caldwell leaned back, her expression unreadable, but the silence was its own verdict. Naomi's truth had cut through the theater. Naomi sank back into her seat, her breath shaky but freer than it had been in months. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Marcus still in trouble, Celeste's claws still sharp, but for that moment, the courtroom belonged to truth, not appearances. The ruling came on a Thursday morning, delivered in a voice that carried no theatrics, only certainty. Judge Miriam Caldwell adjusted her glasses, her silver hair catching the pale light that filtered through the courthouse blinds. "This court finds that Naomi Carter is hereby granted legal guardianship alongside Mr. Ethan Cross. Custody will remain shared, with both parties carrying equal decision-making authority regarding the welfare of Caleb Cross." The gavel fell once, firm and final. Celeste Moore sat frozen at her table, her painted lips parted but empty of words. For once her sharp armor of poise faltered, her eyes darting to the gallery as if someone might still believe her story. No one did. The press scribbled, cameras clicked softly, and murmurs filled the room like a rising tide. Celeste rose, heels clicking against the tile, her face carved into something brittle. She gathered her purse with a snap and left the courtroom without looking back. Naomi remained seated, her breath stuck in her chest. The words, legal guardianship, echoed through her as if she had borrowed air from another life. Her hands trembled on the wood of the table until Ethan reached out, not commanding, not rehearsed, just steady. "You did it," he said softly. She shook her head. "We did it." For the first time, Ethan smiled without calculation. Outside the courthouse, autumn had painted the city with ochre leaves, the air crisp and alive. Reporters swarmed the steps. Joel Mercer, silent as a sentinel, pushed through them, his broad shoulders creating space. His face betrayed nothing, but the smallest flicker of relief passed through his eyes as he guided Naomi and Ethan toward the waiting car. While Denver buzzed with the aftermath, in Fort Collins another thread unraveled. Marcus Carter sat on a wooden bench inside the police station, his hoodie wrinkled, his lip bruised, eyes rimmed red. He was only 19, but today he looked younger, like a boy who had worn his sister's sacrifices too long. Officer Janet O'Leary, the desk sergeant with short-cropped blonde hair and freckled skin, returned with a clipboard. "Good news," she said, her voice gruff but not unkind. "Someone posted your bail." Marcus blinked. "Naomi?" Janet shook her head. "A man, dressed better than the governor, signed the papers and left." Minutes later, Marcus stepped outside into the cool evening air. A sleek black sedan idled at the curb. Ethan leaned against it, hands in the pockets of his tailored coat, his eyes sharp but softened with intent. "Get in," he said simply. Marcus hesitated, shame twisting inside him, but he obeyed. The ride back to Denver was quiet at first. Marcus stared at his shoes, his voice finally cracking. "I didn't mean for her to carry all of this. She gave up everything for me, and I still screwed it up." Ethan studied him for a long moment. "You're young. Mistakes are part of the deal. But running from them, that's a choice, and choices define who you become." Marcus swallowed, nodding. Ethan leaned forward, his tone firm. "If you want another chance, I'll pay your tuition. But only if you promise Naomi and yourself that you won't waste it. You fight for that education like she's been fighting for you all these years." Marcus's hazel eyes filled, a mirror of his sister's quiet strength. "I promise," he whispered. 2 weeks later, life at the Cross estate carried a rhythm it had never known. Caleb had returned home from the hospital, thinner but recovering. Naomi organized his medications, his meals, his bedtime stories, each task lined with tenderness. Ethan was different too. He no longer locked himself away in his study until dawn. He attended dinner, helped Caleb with puzzles, even burned toast one morning trying to learn the art of breakfast. Joel, ever watchful, found himself standing further back during family moments, realizing that protection sometimes meant letting people breathe. On a chilly Sunday afternoon, the backyard transformed. The cottonwood trees swayed, leaves tumbling across the grass. A few close friends and neighbors gathered, unaware of what Ethan had planned. At the center of the patio stood the Cadillac Escalade, polished to a shine one last time. Its presence stirred mixed emotions in Naomi, the memory of terror and salvation, of risk and rescue. Ethan stepped forward, his voice carrying over the quiet hum of conversation. "This car once symbolized everything wrong with me. Rules, control, possessions above people. But one day, someone proved that its worth was not in the price tag, but in what it carried. A life. My son's life." He paused, eyes flicking toward Naomi. "I've sold it. And with that money, we've created the Caleb Foundation, a trust to help children with chronic illnesses who can't afford the care they need." Applause broke out, warm and genuine. Naomi felt her throat tighten as she looked at Caleb. The boy's face lit up with pride, his small hands clapping fiercely. She reached down to steady him, but he shook her hand away, stood taller, and whispered loudly enough for all to hear, "Mommy." The words stunned the air into silence. Naomi froze, her heart stumbling. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. She looked at Ethan, expecting anger, correction, denial. Instead, he only met her gaze and nodded once, slow and deliberate, his lips pressing into a line that trembled with unspoken gratitude. Caleb reached for her hand again. Naomi knelt, pulling him close, pressing her face into his soft hair. "I'm here," she whispered. The boy hugged tighter, and the backyard seemed to exhale, as if the mansion itself had been waiting for this release. Ethan stood a step behind, his arms folded loosely, the sharpness of his profile softened by something rare, peace. The people around them clapped again, but quieter now, reverent, as though they were witnessing not charity or law, but something far greater, family being chosen, built not by blood, but by love. For the first time in years, Naomi felt the weight lift. Her mother's memory, Marcus's struggles, Caleb's frailty, they were all still there, but carried together, they were no longer unbearable. She closed her eyes and let the boy's word echo inside her. Mommy. At the end of this story, we are reminded of something simple but powerful. Family is not always defined by blood, but by the choices we make to love, protect, and stand for one another. Naomi's courage, Ethan's transformation, and Caleb's innocent trust show us that true strength lies in compassion, not in wealth or pride. In our daily lives, we may not face gates and courtrooms, but we do face moments where we must decide whether to stay silent or to act with love. Choosing kindness, even when it costs us something, can change not only one life, but many. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and if you believe in the power of chosen family, type Amen below. Remember to subscribe for more stories that inspire, and may God bless you and your loved ones with peace, courage, and compassion in every step you take.